Blake is here. He holds a master's with honors from the London School of Economics. He conducted graduate research with the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the UN Development Program, and the Islamic Development Bank. He has published many works on more than a dozen topics. Bill is a lifelong Republican and began by delivering leaflets supporting Ronald Reagan in 1976.
From a little red wagon.
He has served in leadership capacities with various Republican organizations, including his current leadership of the Lincoln Society, the oldest co-ed Republican organization in Collin County, which meets once a month at noon at Spring Creek Barbecue in McKinney. And I like to go because it's a lot of fun, and he's always very good. He and his wife, Vicki, have 3 children. They live in Plano and attend Stonebriar Community Church. Please give a warm welcome to Bill Blake.
I think it's always a great idea that you have some idea that the person who's up in front of you talking knows something about the subject that they're speaking to you about. I'm one of those people that's terribly overeducated. I have a master's degree in international relations from London School of Economics. I hold 4 degree certificates from that institution in political science, international relations, international finance, and economics. She mentioned that I did graduate research with the Islamic Development Bank in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. I can speak at length about efforts to try and interface Western finance with Sharia-compliant finance. It's not an easy thing to do. But at any rate, what we're going to be talking about today is China. And what I'm going to try and do in the first part of this speech is give you kind of a flyover so you have some grounding in how China got to where it is today, what it really looks like today in terms of its power and capacity, and what the next 20 years are likely to look like. Who's got the clicker? Oh, you need the clicker. Here you go. Thank you. Let's go ahead and advance it. 19, whoa, come back. There we go. You got it? There we go. It's jumping. 1977 is the year that changed everything for China. Prior to 1977, China had gone through a series of very difficult stages. Of course, it came out of the Boxer Rebellion, the dynasty system. By the dawn of the 20th century, imperial China was in great decline. Interestingly enough, one of the things that propelled China into decline during the 19th century was a lack of women. During the 1860s, statistics show that for every 3 men in China, there was 1 potential mate. 3 men for every 1 woman. And that tends to bring about chaos. Nothing settles down a civilization quite like the love of a good woman. In 1911, you had a military revolt that brought an end to the last dynasty. You had the ascendancy of a republic, a very weak republic, under Sun Yat-sen, and then his successor, Chiang Kai-shek. If the name Chiang Kai-shek is rattling around in the back of your brain, remember that he will become the nationalist leader in China. 1931 was a turning point in this fledgling Chinese democracy. I have to use the quotes to call it a democracy. Japan is incrementally invading the eastern half of China. And essentially this puts everything in terms of nation building on hold. What precedes is a loose confederation between the rising communists and the nationalists to fight their common enemy, the Japanese. But of course, with the US victory over Japan at the conclusion of World War II, then that left a power vacuum and two competing factions who both want to rule China. And of course, as we all know, the communists won, and the nationalists were forced to flee to the island of then Formosa, what we now call Taiwan. This brought Mao Zedong and hardcore communism. Let me repeat that. Hardcore communism. The kind of communism that made Joseph Stalin a little uncomfortable. Think about that. He set about a series of very costly campaigns that collectively produced starvation and poverty. Right out of the gate, their involvement in the Korean War, by fighting the United States and its allies. The Great Leap Forward campaign, which nearly destroyed the agricultural capacity of the country. And then, of course, the Cultural Revolution, which was nothing but a series of purges and disruptions to the normal flow of civilization. But in 1976, Mao died. And that left what were called the Gang of Four. These were inheritors to the throne, if you will. It really didn't work out well for them. Mao's widow, in addition to the Gang of Four, are all jockeying for power. They all end up getting arrested and convicted for crimes against the state by another generation that is coming to power. And that generation was led, if you would, by this man. Man of the Year in 1979, I believe is correct. Yes. Deng Xiaoping consolidates power. Remember, we're not talking about an orderly transfer of power. He had to very astutely consolidate all the factions of power in China to take control, and he did. And then he did something that nobody expected. He publicly repudiated the Cultural Revolution, which was the defining trait of Mao's Communist China. He initiated something called the Beijing Spring, where it became actually popular to criticize all of China's problems that were the function of the Cultural Revolution. In 1979, Deng orders a complete dismantling of the commune system. And then he launches a world tour, including coming to the United States of America. One of the places that Deng traveled to was the Johnson Space Center in Houston. That was one of the things that was at the top of his list to see while he was here. He also visited the headquarters of Coca-Cola and Boeing, and while he was there, negotiated contracts for China to buy products from Coca-Cola and from Boeing, eventually allowing Coca-Cola to come into China and sell the product. He conceived of the one country, two systems policy for Hong Kong, which China was going to be taking back from the British, and Macau, which China was going to be taking back from Portugal. What the revolts that you have seen this spring about the new extradition bill, where if you are arrested for a crime, which is a frivolous thing in China, you can be arrested for just about anything, you can actually be extradited back to mainland China, even if you're not from there. People who grew up, were born, and lived in Hong Kong. If they are accused of a crime and arrested, they will be able to be extradited to mainland China. That's why there have been 2 million Hong Kong residents protesting in the streets, because that is in violation of the one country, two systems policy that that man created in the very late 1970s. That's when he began to conceive of it. Well, probably the most transformative thing that Deng did was to create special economic zones. These would be little pockets along the coast where Western countries and Western corporations could bring their money and engage in economic activities. Now, that's a very fancy way of saying, come use our slave labor. That's really what we're talking about. There is a reason that a company could build a factory in China and make that product in that factory in China and then ship it back across the Pacific Ocean and it still be cheaper than making it right where it's going to be bought. Slave labor. There's no other way to put it, if you would. The original 4 special economic zones are marked by these blue markers. But since then, far more have been added. In fact, a new one was created in the last 6 months. Inside these well-defined municipal areas, a Western company could contract to build a factory, have labor, export their product, all inside the special economic zone. Now here's what's really interesting. This is where these red dots are where the wealth of China lies. Shenzhen is one of the most popular cities. It is a special economic zone. If you're a baby born in Shenzhen, one baby out of every 11,000 born is born to a millionaire's household. 1 out of every 100,000 is born to a billionaire's household. However, if you are so unfortunate as to be born outside of a special economic zone, there's a 91% chance that you're being born into a household that has less than the equivalent of $2,500 US. And for the most part, much less than $2,500. In 1992, Deng Xiaoping reopens the Shanghai stock market. And very symbolically, he did it to the day on the 40th anniversary of Mao Zedong closing that stock market as a vestige of Western capitalism. The reopening of that stock market became the mechanism for the wealth being generated inside these special economic zones to be patriated amongst Chinese. A select few Chinese, but Chinese nonetheless. Today, of course, we know that China is the world's largest exporter. They also happen to be the second largest importer in the world. Today, the United States economy, the GDP is roughly $20.5 trillion. China's GDP is $13.4 trillion. And if you put this into comparison, if you take the next 3 largest national economies, Japan, Germany, and the United Kingdom combined are 11.8. What's even more interesting is, if you would, there is a reasonably good chance, not a certainty, but a reasonably good chance, that China will become the largest economy by 2030, edging out the United States of America. And in fact, the prediction is by 2025, the blue line is the United States, the gold line is China, Japan is in red, India is that first gray bar there. Now, look forward 25 years. Now, the first thing I will tell you as an economist is, anytime you're making a prediction about something as far away as 2050, you kind of got to take that with a grain of salt. But nonetheless, there are a lot of reasons to believe that that kind of momentum can continue. There are some very specific reasons why that momentum could be thwarted. Probably if you were to make a list, you would say chief among those reasons would happen to be the man who actually occupies the White House at this moment. But if we use these economic assumptions, this is from the International Monetary Fund. By 2050, here's the United States, there's China, and we're neck and neck with India. This past December, the Department of Justice revealed in their report that approximately 90% of global corporate espionage and industrial secrets theft involves China. That really shouldn't surprise anybody in this room, does it? No. But 90% globally involves the Chinese. What are their 4 major methods of propelling their technology and their economy that we would find unacceptable? Forced technology transfer. They have 2 ways to do that. There's the overt way and the covert way. Here's the overt way. Frank, you want to come to a special economic zone and build your factory. No problem. We'll supply you with labor. You come, you ship your equipment in, we'll provide the building, we'll provide the labor, we will march them in every morning, 15 minutes ahead of schedule to make sure that they are all at their stations before it's time to begin their shift. And we'll cut you a heck of a deal for this. But as part of the deal, we want you to share with us how it is that you build your widget. So, we'll give you a heck of a deal, but you've got to share with us how you do it. That's the overt way. Here's the covert way. We're going to build your factory. We're going to bring your labor in. And after 2 years, 2.5 years, maybe as little as 12 months, depending upon the complexity of the manufacturing process, one day you're looking down on the factory floor and you realize that nobody from the military is there marching your workers in. They're just not there. Because they've been marched into the factory, built immediately across the road from you, now building the same thing that you've been building with labor you trained. That is a transfer of technology, and one that a great many Western companies of all kinds did not anticipate. Intellectual property theft. We know what that is, right? We don't care about your copyright. We don't care about your patent. We're just gonna do it. We're gonna take it and we're gonna do it. Cyber attacks and online piracy, it's now believed that probably somewhere north of 70% of all cyber attacks in the world originate in China. And it is believed that the great majority of those attacks are organized by the People's Liberation Army in their various forms. Online piracy. Ask Sony about online piracy. When they have next month's blockbuster release stolen from their hard drive by hackers, and now that movie is being spilled in dark places all over the world. Now we can look at that and say, well, okay, well, that's unfortunate. It's a movie. Believe me, they do it with things that are far more consequential than just movies. And then here's the other way they do it. They use their money, their wealth, and they come shopping for companies. We'll talk a little bit later about the Chinese owning companies and assets just north of our border in Canada. Yeah, they do. They own companies in the United States, and Chinese companies operate in the United States. For those of you who don't know, we were talking about this before, but Huawei has been in the news quite a bit over the last year. Did everybody know that the North American headquarters for Huawei is in Plano, Texas? Yeah. Corner of Tennyson and Parkwood, about 4 blocks from my office. They used to have a great big sign. Yeah, now they don't. They're a little bit more low profile. But nonetheless, they want to use their money and our free economic system to come in where they are being allowed and buy companies, because if they do that, then they can absorb that into their collective. What else do you do with your wealth? You build power. What you're looking at is the Chinese aircraft carrier, the Liaoning. It was the very first aircraft carrier that China built. They have 2, number 3 is under construction right now. Like everything else pretty much the Chinese do, a lot of it is borrowed technology. Okay? These jets that you see here are Chinese copies of original Soviet designs Russian jets. Okay? They're not as good as the Russian jets, but they don't necessarily have to be as good as my good friend, former Judge Keith Self likes to say, quantity has a quality all of its own. If you would. From my colleagues at James Research, here's some more information about an aircraft carrier. If you'd like to take a picture of that, please feel free. You see the 12-degree ski jump angle. Yeah. Probably one of the best things that we've got going for us. One of the best things going for the United States Navy is that their aircraft carrier requires that 12-degree ski jump. Why does it require that ski jump? Because the Chinese copies of the Soviet jets can't actually take off reliably without it. The problem with it is that it limits how many munitions you can attach to the aircraft before it takes off. If you load it down too heavy, it has a tendency to slide into the ski jump and explode. Nonetheless, even a great number of lightly armed aircraft can be dispatched from this aircraft carrier. Now, one thing that people ask me quite frequently is, how big is it? Let's put it in perspective. This has a displacement of 65,000 tons. That is exactly the same size as the United Kingdom's largest aircraft, which is the HMS Queen Elizabeth. Exactly the same size. The new standard in the United States Navy is the USS Gerald Ford, our latest aircraft carrier, which displaces 100,000 tons. So it's not near as big as the Ford. It is very close in size to the USS Abraham Lincoln. It is equipped with a fairly sophisticated array of tactical equipment, missile launchers, CWIS stations. If you don't know what CWIS is, it's a 20-millimeter round that is fired very rapidly and kind of a Gatling gun kind of equipment that's meant to obliterate incoming aircraft and missiles as it approaches. It's a technology that we developed. Yes, Frank?
Does it have the electric rail launchers you use?
Does not. They do not have rail technologies. No. But then again, neither do we in any practical sense. We have a rail gun. We just can't mount it on a ship because we haven't figured out how to adequately power the thing in a mobile format. If you've seen any of the footage or any of the pictures of the United States Navy's railgun, and it's an impressive thing. If you don't know what a railgun is, it's essentially a cannon that launches a non-explosive shell, something about the size of a Buick. Okay? At speeds so rapidly, it uses electromagnetic pulse to launch, and it can launch that hunk of metal so fast that when it launches, the air ignites. If you watch the video, you would think that you're seeing muzzle flash. No, that's not muzzle flash because there's no propellant in the railgun. That's simply the air catching fire as the thing accelerates. It probably is the future of non-missile armaments, but you still have to figure out how to crank enough power into that electromagnetic rail launcher, and we haven't figured out how to miniaturize that enough to put it on a ship yet. That's something they've been working on now for, if you're familiar with it, you know they've been working on it for about 20 years. Okay, let's move on from the aircraft carrier. What you're seeing is a satellite photograph. This particular photograph was taken while the Sanya carrier dock was still under construction. It's over 700 meters long, and it is large enough to fully supply, restock 2 of those aircraft carriers simultaneously. They are now working on 2 more docks, and their 3rd aircraft carrier is under construction. I think most people are probably familiar with their efforts to turn reefs in the South Pacific Sea into islands and military stations. I'll tell you more about that a little later. Some of their equipment that they like to put on show. This isn't fake equipment. This is real equipment. Now, we don't know how well it really works, most of it, but quantity has a quality all of its own. Tanks, anti-tank missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, and of course a large variety of fighters and transports. Drones, yes, they're deep in drone technology. Wheeled assault guns. Of course, one of the questions that people ask me quite frequently, it's amazing how many people over the years have asked me, when do you think they'll get the bomb? And of course the answer is 1964. China's been a nuclear power since 1964. And in fact, this particular ranking was put together by Janes in the summer of 2015. It shows at that time, Janes estimated that China was number 4 in the world in terms of operational warheads. They've now leapfrogged over France, and they are quickly gaining on Russia. It doesn't hurt that Russia's assembly of warheads are increasingly becoming non-operational. But China's building warheads, nuclear warheads, and not just simple ones either, if you will. I'm going to take you through some of their missile technology. In the upper left-hand corner, you see the DF-21D. This is what's known as the carrier killer. What makes it unusual is that it's the only ballistic missile in the world that has a warhead that can be directionalized. In other words, the warhead itself has a separate directional system than just the missile. Why? They built this missile, they conceived of this missile to do one thing, to destroy United States aircraft carriers. The idea being that they launch the missile to a very high trajectory, and before it's over the aircraft carrier, the warhead detaches, and then they guide that warhead on almost a perpendicular trajectory right through the middle of the flat top. Can they do it? Well, here's what we do know. They took one of the largest cargo tankers that they had, and they built it out using plywood to be about the same profile as a mid-sized United States aircraft carrier. And then they launched their missile, and they detached their warhead, and they drilled that warhead right through the middle of that simulated aircraft carrier. The idea being that the warhead is also very, very heavy. It's a single warhead. And it carries, it's believed that it carries as much mass in metal as it does in detonation material. Why? Well, United States aircraft carriers are equipped with very good 20 millimeter CWIS systems that are meant to shoot down and blow apart missiles before they get to the ship in a fairly uncomfortably near range, but nonetheless. But here's the thing. If a CWIS is able to disable a warhead on a perpendicular trajectory, you still have mass and gravity. And ain't nothing that CWIS can do about that. So that's pretty scary stuff. DF-16, that's your Taiwan-Okinawa killer. Here's what makes this really interesting. Do you see these doors? You can see very clearly, you can see the little panels on the tops of the missile just below the warhead. These particular missiles are equipped with a hypersonic system that kicks in. So the idea being that if you're launching that missile toward Taiwan, what's on Taiwan and Okinawa? Patriot missile batteries, anti-ballistic defense systems, right? How do those systems work? Radar sees an incoming missile, it paints that missile, it targets it, it launches its countermeasure, blows up the missile, there we go, right? And believe me, the Patriot batteries have come a long way since the first Gulf War, and we are watching Scuds sometimes getting blown up and sometimes not, right? However, the Chinese have engineered a hypersonic booster. The missile can detect when it's been painted by radar, and when it has been, it kicks in the booster. After the Patriot missile has been launched, when the Patriot missile gets to where it's going to intercept the DF-16 isn't there anymore because it mashed on the gas. Now, is that enough to defeat our anti-ballistic defense measures? We don't know. Hasn't been tried. But this is what they're working on. This is the kind of thinking that's going into place. The Guam killer, DF-26, this is a missile that was specifically designed to wipe out our military operations on the island of Guam. And then, of course, there's the DF-5B. This is called the Global Killer. This is a 3-stage intercontinental ballistic missile that's launched from a silo using a liquid propellant. Officially, the DF-5B is capable of carrying 3 MIRVs, multiple independent reentry vehicles. That means the warhead breaks apart into smaller warheads. That's a technology that we developed in the 1960s. We believe that it'll actually hold somewhere between maybe 5 to 7. 3 doesn't cover the space, okay? The range on those intercontinental ballistic missiles, 15,000 kilometers. 91% of the world. Okay? But here, this is the missile that gives them cold sweats in the Pentagon. This is the DF-41. This is a road-ready intercontinental ballistic missile. The range on it is only about 7,500 miles. However, China sends transport ships all over the world as the largest exporter and the second largest importer. In the dark of night, they can drive one of these onto a cargo ship that we cannot see with our satellite technology and put them all over the world. Africa, South America, wherever they want. They don't need extreme range because they can set up a remote network of missiles. Have they? I can honestly tell you, I do not know. If the NSC or the CIA knows. They didn't tell me. But nonetheless, they have the capacity to do it. And that's what's genuinely scary. Tracy. What you're seeing is a Gen-class nuclear ballistic submarine, or a boomer, as we call them in the Navy. This particular ballistic submarine can launch 12 U-2 missiles. These are actual photos taken from a very long lens of a test firing, one of the early tests, in fact, of the Yulang being launched by that particular submarine. It will only help carry one warhead per missile, but each boat will launch 12 missiles. And here's what you need to know. Those missiles had a range, we believe, of right around 4,600 miles. If this boat is in Chinese waters, it can hit Alaska. If they park it just south of Japan in the South China Sea, they can hit Alaska and Hawaii. If launched from waters on the far side of Hawaii, they can hit the West Coast. And if they penetrate our SOSUS warning nets in the Pacific and manage to launch from waters east of Honolulu before being intercepted, they can hit all 50 states, if you will. And yes, Virginia, they have taken some tours of running Chinese ships through American waters. That's Fox News, and that was 2015.
Define U.S. waters, you're talking about beyond?
U.S. sovereign waters.
Okay.
So according to international maritime law, a foreign nation can infringe upon a nation's sovereign waters, technically what's called extraterritorial waters, right? For the United States, we're not talking about coming inside 3 miles or 5 miles or even 7 miles, but 10 miles and 12 miles within shore, okay? Yeah, and according to international maritime law, what I started to say was, the tradition is that if a military vessel is merely passing through, it's called passage of convenience. Technically, they're allowed to do that. I'm still not comfortable with that. Are you? Okay, so that's part one. I told you a little bit about how they got from 1977 to where they are today, and the very scary things that they've built, that they own and can use today. What do the next 2 decades look like? In this second part, we're going to lay that out. Does anybody know what OBOR stands for? No? Okay. Tracy, if you would. OBOR is the Global Strategic Plan for China to gain dominance over the next 20 years. They do not wish to disintegrate anything. They want to own it. And this is how they're going to go about doing it, or at least attempt. The One Belt, One Road initiative was conceived of as a resurrection of the old Silk Road, which was a trading road that ran from China to Europe. We all remember Marco Polo, right? Well, this takes that idea onto steroids. And it involves just about every form of infrastructure that you can imagine. You need pipelines, we're going to build it. Highways, we're going to build it. Railroads, we're going to build it. Factories, we'll build those along the way to help facilitate the railroads and the pipelines and your natural resources. What you're seeing is a simplistic map. It may not look simplistic, but this is actually a simplistic drawing of the core of the One Belt, One Road initiative. The blue lines that you see are the maritime component. And you can see the red lines are railways, black lines are oil pipelines, the blue lines are natural gas pipelines, and then all those blue dots you see are Chinese-operated ports. Okay? Because if you are facilitating industry and infrastructure around the world, you've got your hand in just about every corner. If you would.
A question.
Sure, go ahead.
The Allies defeated Germany in World War I through economic blockade. They just militarily collapsed. They were wearing cardboard helmets.
That's not actually how we defeated Nazi Germany in World War II.
World War I.
World War I.
World War I.
Yes,
World War II,
the British and the French did.
World War II is different, but this One Belt, One Road would defeat any opportunity to put an economic blockade in case of war.
That's very true. That's very true. And here's what's even scarier to me. I'm published on the subject of World War I. I once wrote a paper indicting Woodrow Wilson for conduct unbecoming a Western democracy. Woodrow Wilson, through the Versailles process and really even prior to armistice, put a thumb on that process and ran roughshod over it in a way that would lead up to World War II, and I'll be glad to talk about that afterwards. It's not really our core here, but what scares me more about the point that you bring up is we were able to defeat Germany in World War II because of our enthusiastic ability to manufacture. We ended the Great Depression not by the Great Deal, not by a fair deal, not by alphabet soup. We defeated economically the Great Depression and the Axis powers in so doing because we could make stuff. Adolf Hitler is alleged to have once said, when they informed him that the United States could build a Liberty ship in a week, he said, well, how do we beat that? Perhaps the war is lost. Now, that didn't prevent him from continuing to fight on, of course. But we became a world power, a true world power. At the end of World War I, we were a world power, but we had kind of just hit late adolescence. World War II, by the time World War II was done, we were the world power. Who was the greatest holder of gold before World War II? Does anybody know? The United Kingdom. The United Kingdom was the greatest holder of gold in the world. After World War II, who was the greatest holder of gold in the world? We were. Lend-Lease. Wardens. We made stuff and we sold it. We provided low interest loans and we lent. Meanwhile, we put Americans back to work in crazy numbers to facilitate all that. We ended the Great Depression and ultimately we won World War II. Back it up one of you, Patricia. Who do you think is best positioned to win the next war, should it come to that? Yeah, and it's not just that, I hear people all the time say, well, China makes everything, we don't make anything anymore. To a certain extent, that's true, but it goes well beyond what goes on inside of China as you're about to learn. Okay. China's global port investment. And yes, there are two dots practically on top of one another in Southern California. Now those are highly scrutinized and regulated ports that are still operated by Communist China. We got one in Seattle too. Some of these ports are going to become even more important than simply moving cargo in and out of, as you're about to learn. One of the key features of OBOR the One Belt, One Road initiative is something called debt trap diplomacy. It's kind of the same principle as the buy here, pay here, used car dealer. I'm going to sell you this hunk of junk, and I'm going to finance you. And know you got bad credit, but don't worry, the interest rate's only 23%. And if you don't make your payment every Friday, we're going to come back and take that car back. The idea being that if you loan money to countries that really can't possibly pay them back, you now have collateral. You have a footprint. You have the ability to lay claim to the things that back the debt. Biggest recipients of Chinese overseas funding, Russia. Russia is the single biggest recipient. Why would they do that? Are they going to come in and try and claim Russia at some point? I mean, I'm not going to rule anything out. I don't predict the future. It's probably more likely that this is how you build really, really tight international relations with Russia. You give them our money. And it is our money. Televisions, clothing, all the stuff we buy. It's building their aircraft carriers, their One Belt, One Road initiative, and it's being given to Russia. Who's next? Pakistan. Why would Pakistan be second? Anybody have an idea?
Strategic nuclear.
No, they don't need what Pakistan's got. They've got way better than what Pakistan's got. I'm going to take you back to The Godfather. Actually, it's much older than that, but the principle is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Who is regionally China's single largest rival? India. That's absolutely correct. Who hates India? The Pakistan. That's exactly right. And it's going to get real tangible real quick here in a minute, as you'll see. Angola. Why Angola? It's unstable, gives them a footprint in Africa. Just one of many. Why Africa? What does Africa have? Loads and loads of natural resources that are just being barely tapped. Ethiopia, Sri Lanka. How could Sri Lanka be fifth on the list? Same reason as Pakistan. If you don't know where Sri Lanka is, it's that little teardrop island right off the coast of India. Laos, Venezuela. We'll talk. Yes, ma'am.
Oil. That's why China
Yep.
was in there to
Yep.
get them in debt, to get the oil,
Yes.
and then and then maybe even one of those missiles we can't detect there. And then Russia visited, and then all of a sudden they said, "Okay, bad guy, whatever, Maduro, you stay here."
It's like you're reading my mind.
Yeah.
You're absolutely reading my mind.
Yeah, and then the
Well done.
islands they make to China, and so they're getting closer and closer to us.
Well done.
That nobody is paying attention to.
Somebody give that lady a bachelor's degree. Turkmenistan. Why Turkmenistan? Because it's on the road to Europe. Okay. Sudan, Africa. Ecuador. Now you're starting to get in our neighborhood, right? Okay, if you will. Let's talk oil. You brought it up. What you're seeing is, I wish I had one more current. Unfortunately, this one's about 3 months old, and it changes that fast. The map that you're seeing is where PetroChina has activities. See that $1.7 billion in Canada? Now, the arrow, my colleague in London who prepared this map put the arrow in the wrong place. The arrow needs to be pointed toward the oil sands. Okay? Initially, it was a consortium of Canadian companies and a Chinese company, and the Chinese company was just one little wedge of the operation. Now China owns that entire consortium, and they are by far the biggest, most effective player in Canadian oil sands. Venezuela, $20 billion into Venezuela. Do you think they'll get any of that money back? Think they knew that? Yeah, they did. Australia, 3 different PetroChina fields in play in Australia. Saudi Arabia, what? How could China be doing that? Yeah. No, it's a joint venture with Aramco, but they're still there. Qatar, Iraq, Iran, Niger. Who won't we do business with? We'll do business with everybody because we want a finger in every little pie. Tracy. What you're seeing, these photos that you see here, for your benefit. You are seeing the People's Liberation Army. You see the blue uniforms right here? That's boots on the ground in Venezuela, my friends. They're there for 2 reasons. They're there to protect their collateral, and in so doing, that means fortifying the Maduro regime. Okay? I'll tell you a little story. In the waning days of the last regime in Venezuela, China came in and loaned Venezuela a whole new round of debt. I want to say it was like the 8th or the 9th round of debt that they loaned to Venezuela. You say, why would you keep loaning money to Venezuela when you know they're just getting deeper and deeper in debt? Debt trap diplomacy, right? All right. So in the last round, they said, you know what? You guys don't even have to pay us principal and interest. We'll take our payment in oil. It's a nationalized oil company. So all the dictator has to do is say, okay, pay him in oil. Oh, wait a minute. We're not going to credit you dollar for dollar because you're in such a decaying state of array that if we send a transport ship all the way around the world to pick up your oil, we can't be guaranteed there'll be somebody there to pump it onto the ship when the ship gets there. So we're going to credit you 60 cents on the dollar. That means 40 cents worth of free oil, basically, to absolve 60 cents worth of debt. Well, what does that get the Chinese? Lots of oil at a really bargain price. But even with that, Venezuela couldn't produce enough oil to pay anywhere near the kind of debt that they were taking on. More to the point, while that was going on, Venezuelan oil field workers, the most experienced, really some of the best labor in Venezuela, was fleeing to Canada. Canada took them in with open arms. Free visa to come to Canada for Venezuelan oil field workers. This picture that you see down here in the bottom left, Venezuela, Chinese regular, Chinese special forces. These are PLA troops marching in Venezuela. And this picture was taken in the last 60 days. Now, I told you about the ports. What was special about the ports? The port is more than just a port. Port's a great place to do business, right? If you're an importer and an exporter, the way China is. It also gives you the pretext for a military footprint. What you're seeing in this circle is the Horn of Africa, the country of Djibouti, Obock, the Gulf of Aden, which opens out into the confluence of where the Red Sea meets the Indian Ocean. This is a critical juncture for global shipping. It also happens to be where China founded a port, and in so doing, the next step after you founded the port was, if you would, you create the first overseas military base that China has. Okay? This area right here is what it looked like before the Chinese came in. It's kind of unremarkable. Tracy, if you would. This is what it looks like today. Tracy, if you would. The first thing they did after they built the port was they brought in the Jinganshan. Okay? This is an amphibious warship, carries 800 troops, 6 helicopters, armored vehicles, landing craft. It's exactly what you need to put men on shore. And this ship is now stationed, it's now one of several, but this was the first that was stationed at the very first Chinese overseas military base. Put another way, the first military base China built outside of China. And this has all happened in the last 36 months, progressively, if you will. This is what that little chunk of land looks like today. What you're seeing is satellite photography. We don't really know for sure what everything is. We can guess a few things. I mean, you don't have to be a genius to figure out that you have a VTOL strip, you've got a heliport, they've got an ammo dump, you've got barracks. But here's what's really interesting. Ports don't have these. You see this wall running around on 2 flanks? And it's since been completed. This, unfortunately, I'm embarrassed to say this photograph is 3.5 months old. This wall, you can't really tell too well from the picture, it's 7 meters thick. You don't build 7-meter thick walls around a port. You put up barbed wire. Right? It is believed that those walls contain troops and armament that can be positioned at the perimeter and initiated as they see fit. We don't know what all they got in the walls because they're inside the walls. Tracy, flip. What you're seeing here are Chinese special forces stationed at the new overseas military base in Djibouti. Now, what's next? Well, it worked in Djibouti. Why wouldn't it work in other places? What you're seeing here is the Gwandar port in Pakistan. This is the old Gwandar port. These are big boats for the Gwandar port. This is the early stages of construction of the Chinese port at Gwandar. And since this picture was taken, there are already military assets poised here with permission of the Pakistani government to protect the construction that's taking place. Yes?
So maybe, I don't want to digress into it, how's your technology with EMP?
That's a whole other subject. Let's talk offline on that. I'll be able to talk to you about that. The short answer is, EMP is not difficult technology.
No.
It's really not. If you're able to create a fissionable device, the next stage is creating a fusionable device. China has that as well. Hydrogen bomb. Hydrogen bombs make big EMPs. Fissionable devices, atomic devices, create small EMPs. Okay? That's in the real list. Okay. Why this? Remember, you're now on essentially the northwestern flank of India. Okay? Tracy Beaver. This is the new location for China's port in Sri Lanka, which is that little teardrop island right off the Indian coast. They are coming in around India very, very strategically. Done under the pretext of global trade, but of course, once you control the port and nobody's powerful enough to stop you, it's militarized. Tracy. What you're seeing here is part of Obor. This is the Kunming Kyukyu. This will move oil, gas, railway, and eventually vehicles from Kunming, China, through the border town of Wanding to the coast of Myanmar. This is India, right here. If you know anything about Indian geography, you know that India has on its eastern side, it has that little hook that kind of digs into Bangladesh. That's India, but more importantly, the thrust of India is right here. It's crowding around it. Here you go. Okay. Here is the port. And it's not even finished, and it's being militarized as well. Here's India. Here's Pakistan. That other port that I just showed you is right over here. Here's Sri Lanka. They've got them triangulated. I think the Indians are a little nervous. A good friend of mine, who used to teach at the War College in Washington, wrote a paper, if you would, Chris, wrote a great paper some years ago called The Water Wars. And in that paper, he laid out the premise of China and India going to war over our most precious commodity. Not oil, but drinking water. China and India both get the majority of their potable water, their fresh water, from the same source, the Himalayas. And over the last 25 years, the Chinese have mounted an enormous infrastructure effort to dig canals and channels and high-altitude reservoirs to coax as much of the snow melt down their side of the mountains. And as a result, India is already experiencing, 5 years ago, they were already experiencing more and more drought and less water runoff into their rivers because the Chinese were coaxing the water to come down their side. Does anybody think that the Chinese occupation of the roof of the world has anything to do with the Dalai Lama? Does anybody really think the Chinese give a hoot about the Dalai Lama? Of course not. It's all about controlling the water. Okay? If they can diminish the natural water supplies to the second most populated nation on earth, at some point it will no longer be the second most populated nation on earth. I'm going to use the word colleague. And I'll be up front with you and tell you he's just a total European socialist. But I've known him for a while, and he's actually written a great book, a series of books about China. And he has a great understanding of the Chinese mind. He's written extensively about the perception of the Han ethnic superiority that is believed to be in China. But in one of his books, he has a great illustration. He draws a circle around China and India. And it's just a nice little oval. It's not contoured or anything. It's just a nice little oval. And when you look at the global map, you know, here's the map, and here's the little circle. And then he makes the point. There are more people living inside that circle than live outside that circle. So it only naturally begs the question, will the next great conflict emanate in that circle? Well, I think it's pretty safe to say China is preparing itself. Now, one of those blue lines that I showed you on the map earlier swings way out into the Pacific to the tiny island of Vanuatu, where China is building yet another port. It's not like there's a lot of customers on Vanuatu. Okay? Vanuatu is in the heart of where the Pacific theater of World War II was fought. Okay? And what's even more interesting is in this photo, you see some of the early construction efforts. I mean, I'm talking about first month construction on the new port on the little island of Vanuatu. And who's supervising the construction? Chinese Navy. Chinese Navy. There they are. We know about their island building in the South China Sea. They're taking coral reefs and turning them into habitable islands. They're doing it in the historical territories of Vietnam and the Philippines, predominantly. But it's not just as simple as building an island with a runway and a port. This is a picture of this island fairly early in its construction. And what they do is, if you don't know, they bring in shiploads of concrete and rock and dirt, and they just bury the atoll or the reef until they can build it up enough to be a solid island. Tracy, if you will. That island is this island today. This is another photograph. The British plane that took that photograph was very nearly shot down, taking a picture that close.
Isn't that destroying the environment?
Of course.
You never hear about that.
Well, they don't care about that. They don't care. They have no interest in what the 10 people on the stage last night had to say about global threats. China and global warming. And the Chinese are indifferent. In fact, I think suffice it to say, Chinese were watching that debate last night as they're watching the debate tonight. And one word is crossing their mind: please. Please elect one of these people. Please. Okay. Here are these kinds of islands in a much more advanced state. Look at the kind of multi-story buildings. Remember that once upon a time, this was just a jagged little reef. And now look at it. You are expanding your regional control by creating unsinkable aircraft carriers. That's what you're doing. Okay. Look at this gem. This used to be called Johnson Reef. Now it contains a very, very sophisticated radar and listening station. Why is that important? Because that reef is right where U.S. naval fleets typically run when they're going back and forth from Japan to the Persian Gulf. Radar domes, observation towers, troops, guns, you name it. Wind turbines, helipads. Here's another one. This is what used to be called Mischief Reef. Here's the long distance photo. You can clearly see the reef. But if you come dangerously close and you're able to take this picture, this is right there. Okay? This isn't simple stuff. Now, I told you that they had 2 aircraft carriers. There they are. Number 3 is under construction. This is actually a photo that was released last month by the Chinese government. They wanted to show off their ships. The photo was released as part of a tourism brochure for that cruise ship. But very subtly, what's very strategically placed in the background? Those 2 aircraft carriers. Here's the thing that I was drawn to immediately when I saw this photo. What the heck is here? They pixeled out something. I sure would like to know what that was, because the Chinese government didn't want us to see that. There's a whole block right there that's been pixeled out. The government did it. I don't know what it is, and there's no way to know, but isn't that interesting? Okay, maybe if you're international relations wonk like me, you think it's interesting. Tracy?
What kind of submarine technology do they have?
Well, I already showed you a picture of their ballistic missile boat. They have other submarines too. Look, a boomer, for those of you who are former sailors, you know this. The boomer is the ultimate ship, the ultimate boat, as sailors say, in the submarine fleet. Because it's designed to take 12 ballistic missiles under the water and very quietly place them near the trajectories. Remember, during the Cold War, it used to be that if an ICBM was land-launched from the Soviet Union, we would, in theory, have approximately 32 to 33 minutes advance warning. However, if it was launched from the Atlantic, just off our shores, you might have 3, which is to say none, for all practical purposes. Right? They have fast attack subs. They have a whole group. They've got plenty of stuff, but the boomer is kind of the pinnacle of the submarine fleet. So, here's the interesting thing. We look at this and say, how nefarious. Much of the world looks at this and says, where do we sign up? We want to be a part of this. You're going to build factories and infrastructure and highway and pipelines and bring us trade. We want part of that. And now they're holding global conventions. This is a picture from the 2017 convention for Oval. And there were delegates there from a great many countries, itching to participate. Because sometimes future slaves flock to their masters. What's behind all this? What are the principles and values behind this global strategy that China intends to use over the next 2 decades to dominate the world? Well, Xi himself has written this, and I remember, most of you probably know that at one point as a student, Xi Jinping lived in the United States, in Ireland. Lived here, went to school here, made friends, studied America up close. And many people thought, well, then he should have an appreciation for the United States. This gives us an opportunity to build a closer relationship. Well, China has no problem with that. Because you keep your friends close, and you keep your enemies closer. Right? The Chinese dream was enumerated by Xi. Number 1, national rejuvenation. China was once the greatest power in the Western Pacific. It shall be again, and more. Improvement of people's livelihoods. As John F. Kennedy once said, a rising tide lifts all boats. This is how you keep people working, right? Prosperity. As Orwell said, all the animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. Right? Number 4, construction of a better society. Well, if you're part of the machine, that's kind of hard to argue with. But if you're living in a village 600 miles inland, not so much. Number 5, a strengthened military. Well, I think we've seen evidence of that. He believes very firmly that central authority and global commerce and market-driven enterprise can and must coexist. I hear people say to me frequently, oh, the stock market in Shanghai is a sham. It's, populated with all these government-owned companies and government-controlled entities. That you can't argue with that, and yet Americans are rushing to buy A shares of Chinese companies. You can go to the New York Stock Exchange. You can call your mutual fund company and get A shares. If you don't know what an A share is a share of Chinese stock trading on the Shanghai Exchange. A B share is a loose depository reserve of that stock being traded in the United States. Okay? You can buy the A shares now. People rush to do it. Oh, I got to be part of this. So sometimes the slaves flock to the masters. If you were to think about what Deng launched in 1977 and brought us to where we are today, and what she intends to build over the next 2 decades, you come to one conclusion and one conclusion only. This hasn't exactly been a happy talk. It wasn't meant to be. If nothing else, conservatives must know and understand. I over the years, particularly when I was in London, I found myself debating socialists, liberals, and I heard them say all the time, well, I just don't feel that's right. Well, right and wrong isn't something that's felt. It's known. Situational ethics are felt. Right and wrong is not felt. As conservatives, we are called upon to use our brains for decision-making authority and not our heart, not our sentiment. We have to make the best decisions. Now, one thing I'll say, just wrapping all this up, I'm going to confess to you right now, I did not vote for Donald Trump in the primary in 2016. I cast my vote elsewhere. And I had people calling me and asking me, who are you going to vote for in the election? And I said, well, it looks like I'm going to vote for Ted Cruz in the primary and Donald J. Trump in the general election. That's what I thought. And like many conservatives, I'm not always comfortable with his behavior. I'm not always comfortable with the way he carries himself or his demeanor or his disposition. But I'll tell you this. Once you know this, having a man like Donald Trump in the White House at this moment, in all likelihood, is absolutely the greatest possible thing you could have.